Hi, boys and girls. For Monday's assignment, we want you to read chapters 23 and 24 of Chasing Vermeer. If you don't have the book, I'm going to go ahead and read it for you. So chapter 23 on page 226. Petra and Calder raced toward the garden and playground behind the U School. They looked back every few seconds. A man in a dark jacket appeared from around the 59th Street side of the building. He was running in their direction. "Can you see who it is?" Petra's voice was jagged. "Are you the police?" yelled Calder. There was no answer. Gasping for air, they paused for just a second, ready to hug a university policeman. At that moment, the figure emerged from shadow and the moon caught the flat planes of his glasses, turning his eyes into pools of silver. He was moving directly toward them, and moving as if his life depended on it. He was not in uniform. "Run!" Calder panted. Both kids took off, zigzagging around the trees and bushes. "Help! Help!" shrieked Petra. There was no one ahead of them. Where were the dog walkers, the students? The man was gaining on them. They could now hear his breathing. Petra leaped over a sandbox and headed out on the playground. She heard a thud just behind her, and out of the corner of her eye, she saw Calder falling over the edge of the climbing equipment. She stopped. Calder shouted, "Go! Go!" He was up again, but the man was mere seconds behind them now. Petra ran as if she never had run before. She looked back to see Calder high on top of the slide, still clutching his bundle, the man standing below. She could hear Calder's voice piercingly high with fright. "If you come any closer, I'll put my knee through it. I will. Then you'll be in big trouble." She couldn't understand the man's growly reply. Calder's voice drifted back. "You wouldn't dare hurt me." She felt a sharp flash of fear for Calder, and at that same moment a flood of admiration for his quick thinking and bravery. She was on 57th Street now. She raced down the block to the Medici restaurant, pulled open the heavy wooden door, and flung herself in. Luckily, a member of the university police was just leaving. Petra panted out her story about Calder and a man in the playground. She decided not to say anything about the lady. She did not waste any time on questions. They hurried to the alleyway, and she jumped into the front seat of the policeman's car. Minutes later, they pulled up next to the playground. The blue light swept across a form on the ground. She heard the policeman grunt, then say, "Stay where you are, kid," as he reached for his door handle. Leaving the painting on the front seat, Petra leaped out anyway. As they got closer to the slide, she saw that the lump was Calder's sweatshirt on top of a flurry of newspaper. The papers he'd carried when he'd run from the Delia Dell. Oh yes, Calder got away! Petra hopped up and down. The policeman knelt to look at the sweatshirt. "Looks like there's blood on it," he said. Horrified, Petra knelt too. She saw drips of dark liquid on the gray hood. "Come on, kid, you shouldn't be over here." The policeman stood up, then he shouted, "You, stop right there! This is the police!" Petra looked up to see the man who had chased them duck out of the patrol car. Her bundle was tucked under his arm. He ran east. On 58th Street, toward the yards and the fences that Petra knew could hide them. "That's him, the guy who's been chasing us, and he's stolen the painting." "He's got what? Oh, please hurry." The policeman, on one hand of his holster, ran to the patrol car. The assault suspect heading east on 58th Street, carrying a stolen item. Immediate help requested. "Say it's priceless. It's the Vermeer." Hesitating a moment, the policeman said gently, "Honey, they'll be right here." "I'm telling you the truth." Again, the policeman looked at her indulgently and shook his head. "What were you two doing out here alone anyways at this hour?" Petra whispered, "You wouldn't understand if I told you." "Oh, I hope Calder is all right." Petra, crying now, could hardly give her friend's address and telephone number. She had failed him and failed the lady, and now Calder was hurt. As they headed for the police station, she said in a still shaky voice, "If you ever believed in anything, please believe me now." Calder was reported as missing. His parents and Petra's parents set off immediately to search the neighborhood with the police. The Pillets and Andalese were shocked and excited by Petra's news. But there was no time for explanations. Calder's disappearance was more than a little bit frightening. A neighbor stayed in the Pillets' house in case Calder got back on his own. Down the street, Petra was left with the younger kids, who were all asleep. Still dressed, she paced back and forth in the front hall. Where would Calder have gone, and how would he get away from that man who ran so fast? She sat down on the front stairs. What if the man hurt Calder on the playground and then dragged him off someplace? She tried not to picture it. Stay positive, she said to herself. Calder would never let that happen. She asked herself where she would leave the painting if she were the thief and was trying to escape from Hyde Park unnoticed. At least she could think about that. She imagined the lady wrapped in velvet under her sweater. Show me where you are, Petra thought. Please help me find you. Suddenly she felt she knew the lady was close by. Could the thief have struck her underneath someone's porch? In a recycling bin or in a clump of bushes? No, he wouldn't be stupid enough to endanger her. She thought of a garage, but they were usually locked. Then she had another idea. Petra grabbed a snow shovel from her front hall and headed out to the sidewalk. Her brothers and sisters wouldn't wake up, and besides, this would only take a couple of minutes. She'd be careful. The Castellonians' tree house was right next door. Their kids were grown, and it was rarely used anymore. Petra thought she'd take a look and see if anyone had left prints beneath in the snow. If so, she'd go back and she would call the police. She shut the front door quietly behind her. There was a patrol car at the end of the block, moving in the opposite direction. The sound of the engine fading away. Silence. The moon was full and bright. Stepping into the Castellonians' backyard, she held the snow shovel across her body like a weapon. And then she saw the boot prints ending in a trampled place under the tree. They were the size of a man's feet. She stood for a moment, listening and looking up at the treehouse. If those prints belonged to the thief, could he still be up there? It had been more than an hour since he'd grabbed the painting from the patrol car. Why would he sit up there in the cold waiting for somebody to find him? There was only one set of prints, but Petra knew from experience that it was possible to leave the treehouse by inching along a big branch and dropping down on the high bank near the train tracks. He could have hidden the lady and gotten on a train or a bus unnoticed. The treehouse was a small structure with one glass window. It was more or less weatherproof, so it could work as a safe hiding place. She made a snowball and heaved it at the house. It thumped lightly on the side. She threw several more. If someone was in there, she'd hoped that he'd look out and she could run. Nothing. You up there? She called in a shaky voice. No response. Petra had to do it. Propping the shovel against a tree, she began to climb. 1 foot, one hand, next foot, other hand. Petra counted as she climbed, as she grabbed the 12th board. She tried to steady the pounding in her throat. She was now just under the trap door. She paused, breathing deeply and listening. Her pulse seemed to be whispering, 12, 12, 12, 12. She pushed gently on the trap door. No sound from inside. No big hand slammed it closed or jerked it open. She pushed harder. The door fell back with a thud. She stepped up onto the next rung and peered into the house. Calder, she gasped. He was lying on his side, curled into a U-shape around the bundle. She shook him by the shoulder. She grabbed one hand and patted it and rubbed it. It was icy cold. Oh, Calder, what happened to you? His eyes opened and closed. Knocked me off the slide. Head hurts, but I followed him. That's okay. Don't talk. We're almost safe now. You, me, and the lady, Petra said soothingly. She took off her jacket, wrapped Calder in it, and started quickly down the ladder to get help. You'll never guess, Calder muttered.